Bolton Library from Cashel, County Tipperary, has long been considered one of Ireland's most important book collections. It is, at its heart, a scholars' library, a unique collection of over 12,000 rare books, manuscripts, maps and prints. It encompasses the fields of architecture, law, mathematics and medicine, as well as travel and documenting thoughts in religion, art, science and politics.
The library is important to us here in Tipperary because of its association with Cashel. In terms of what it contains, there are so many rare elements, unique items, maps, copies of rare printed material.
This was one of the great diocesan Episcopal 18th century libraries in Ireland. This part of Ireland was most, as it were, significantly associated with the Bolton Library.
The library takes its name from Theophilus Bolton, born in Mrushed in County Mayo around 1678. Theophilus went to Trinity, did a legal degree and a theology degree, was ordained a priest for the Diocese of Dublin in the Church of Ireland in 1703 and became associated completely with St. Patrick's Cathedral. Bolton eventually became Bishop of Clonfert and Kilmacduagh in 1720, the early 1720s, became Archbishop of Cashel in 1730.
Bolton was an improving archbishop, but it is from his love of books that his name remains in the public eye. Not long after his arrival in Cashel, Bolton was gifted approximately 6,000 books from the library of his friend, the recently deceased Archbishop of Dublin, William King.
Bolton was very exact, meticulous in things. He was a bookman, a scholar, described by somebody as the best legal mind in Ireland. He built an annex here in the Cashel Palace, which became the library. The library was for the benefit of the clergy of the Archdiocese of Cashel.
This is an absolutely amazing collection of rare printed books. It is a scholarly library, and it's wonderful to think that 250 years down the line, we still have access to that resource.
The Bolton Library was established in its entirety for the first time in 1736. But soon after, Theophilus Bolton would pass in 1744. His will included explicit instructions for the future of his books.
First, I, the said Theophilus Bolton, Archbishop of Cashel, do hereby leave all my books in my library and dwelling house at Cashel, for the use of the Archbishop of Cashel for the time being, and the clergy of the diocese, my will and meaning being that the said books shall remain and continue in the said library forever for the use of my successors in the said see, and the clergy of the said diocese for the time being, and that none of the said books be removed from thence.
The passage of time, however, had implications for the collection. Availability of resources and a decline in accommodation brought the library and its survival to a point where action had to be taken to secure its future. The Reverend Henry Cotton, who had been sub-librarian in the Bodleian Library at Oxford, was appointed as librarian, and had an association with Cashel for almost 40 years. A dismal situation faced them. Cotton examined the library and made the following comment.
As the Archbishop left no funds for the enlargement or even preservation of the collection, not only has it received no increase since his death, except by a few accidental donations, but has fallen into such great neglect that many of the books have been lost, many utterly spoiled by damp, and very many more left in such a sorry state as to be useless without repair.
It fell to Cotton to organise the construction of a new home for the books, and in 1835 a new chapter house and library on the grounds of St John's Cathedral in Cashel were built, designed by renowned Clonmel architect William Tinsley.
Well, Cotton became the Dean of Cashel, but his forte remained in librarianship. Cotton knew his books. He progressed the library in many ways. Cotton was pivotal in bringing the Bolton Library into modern scholarship of the 1830s, 1840s. The library became known.
The responsibility for the library was left to be taken on by the Dean of Cashel. A number of well-meaning deans through the years made significant efforts to care for the collection and provide a safe home with suitable environmental conditions for it. However, in 1869, the Irish Church Act disestablished and disendowed the Church of Ireland, ripping the chapter of what wealth remained to it and leaving the library without any financial support.
The decision was taken in around the beginning of the 20th century. We can't be responsible for the best of these books. So hundreds of them were removed to Dublin. First of all into Marsh's library and then into the Representative Church Body Library. The basic truth is there was nobody at this time to actually care for the library. So the library remained upstairs in the chapter room.
In the 1960s, Dean Charles Wolfe was installed, and the first serious attempt to secure the library's future was made.
He set about refurbishing the building, which was very much required. He was forced to sell some of the collection to the Folger Library in Washington, and this was necessary because the library building in Cashel was in very poor condition and it needed renovation immediately. He also set about opening the library every day, and he was quite innovative. He had a half-crown slot on the door which you were required to pay going in, and this achieved funds as well. Well, after Dean Wolfe passed away, the library began to deteriorate. Some of the collection was borrowed or maybe stolen as well, and this meant that over the years that the collection depleted, but more importantly the building also began to deteriorate.
Dean David Woodworth arrived in 1984 and unfortunately finds the library in a sorry state.
It's remarkable that they're in a fairly sound state at present. They can be rescued. There are a number of bindings falling off. There are leather bindings where the leather has over-dried, but that can be restored. The real problem is when paper begins to deteriorate and it gets to a point of no returning. It's a sort of dry rot.
Had you run into trouble then of the state of the building, say the atmospherics of the building and their relationship with the state of the books?
Well, the atmospherics of the building are such that the books basically are far too wet. Heat isn't a problem because you can let books get quite cold as long as they don't get wet. And without being too technical about it, the relative humidity is about 20 points% above what it should be on average, and that's bad.
Dean Woodworth secured the aid of the American Irish Foundation and the Smart Foundation. Between them, they oversaw a complete refurbishment of the building.
The building had been literally cracking and sinking. 4 storage heaters tried and failed to keep the temperature at the right level to preserve books. There'd be no means at all of controlling humidity levels and little security to protect those irreplaceable volumes. Now, steel beams hold the structure together, underfloor heating keeps a constant temperature, humidity levels are monitored and corrected, and there's a proper security system. Cashel's treasure house of the writings of the ages has been saved.
The Bolton reopened in 1986 to high expectations. However, through the late 80s and early 90s, visitor numbers remained low.
We're here in the GPA Bolton Library. I first came here in 1999 when I was working at the University of Limerick Library. The university had a relationship with the Bolton Library then, and I was brought here as a special collections librarian to take a look. We noticed that the environmental controls weren't working. So that means the heating, the air conditioning, none of that was working. So this is an example of an exhibition case that housed books in the Bolton Library. So you can actually see here the mold damage on the case and also on the actual picture itself. And that indicates the unsuitable environmental conditions which are disastrous for the keeping of paper and printed books. So we're here on the first floor of the Bolton Library, and here was where the majority of the books were shelved. So there were two lines of shelving, and down the middle of the room here were the exhibition cases showing some of the highlights of the collection. The total count for the collection is about 12,000 items, so there were at least 10,000 books shelved up here on the first floor. The issue was the books were incredibly tightly packed together. They had no room to expand. So because of the high humidity levels, books absorb moisture. They started to expand and they started to damage their structure because of the expansion. So as you can see here on the first floor, there's various cracks in the building, and that allowed air coming in. That also allowed insect infiltration as well. So what we have here is the air conditioning unit from 1986, and at the time it would have worked well. The problem is the library didn't have the funding to run it and then actually to maintain them. So after a number of years, they stopped running, they stopped operating. And the consequence of that then, as you can see here, the mold attacking, the paint, the plasterwork, everything has been affected.
In 1994, a partnership was initiated between the library itself and the University of Limerick. George Cunningham, who was then the chairman of the university's Library Development Committee, would prove to be instrumental in the conservation of the collection.
I visited David Woodward in my capacity as chairman of the Governing Authority Library Development Committee and explored the possibility of UL helping, being a link with him. This was the first time that concrete evidence, help was offered. Sadly, David died suddenly. We created a formal link with the University of Limerick and the Bolton Library. A board of management was appointed. I was chair of that.
Professional help for the collection came in the form of assessments, technological cataloguing and academic support. In 1995, thanks to the work of Dean Philip Knowles in conjunction with the Cashel Heritage Centre, assistance for the library came in the form of a FOSS community employment scheme, making the library available to both researchers and visitors.
So the University of Limerick Library in 2015 put some environmental monitoring sensors into the Bolton Library to get some idea of the environmental conditions. What happened after 6 months was the monitors were showing relative humidity rates between 80 and 90%. Which is far, far too high for any library of rare books. Given the high humidity rates, that helped us plan then for the arrival of the books then, which subsequently came to the university in 2016. Moving the collection from Cashel to UL was a big job. We had a lot of planning. We had to look at all the logistics. We had to bring in a specialist packer from the UK. We had to use a specialist mover as well then to ship the books out of Cashel. We had an inventory of the books from the shelf. So when the wrapped boxes of books arrived in UL with the manifest, we then took them out of that. We had to reconstitute the library. So the books were shelved exactly as they were in Cashel. And our job was to replicate that exactly. So we took the books from the boxes with the inventory onto our own shelves, and we rebuilt the Bolton Library in UL, and that was in 2016.
At the time of the transfer of the collection, I suppose some of the local people were understandably inclined to articulate the view that this was a violation of Archbishop Bolton's express will. Even wills have to be subject to a measure of flexibility in law. The important part of Bolton's intention was that a collection of books should be properly cared for.
So we are in the Bolton Library Strong Room. This is a strong room that was especially created to house a collection like the Bolton, and the Bolton fit in here perfectly. It is temperature and humidity controlled, and it also has a state-of-the-art fire suppression system, so if anything goes wrong, the collection will be safe. The main thing we were able to do in here, because of the space that we have for the collection, is to maintain the original shelving system that was used in Cashel. Because at the end of the day, we don't own the collection, and if it ever goes back, it will reduce complications immensely if we kept the original shelving system. It's as it was in Cashel, except it's now more secure and more stable.
The collection presents numerous possibilities for research and historical study, and offers a valuable means of providing students and researchers with access to rare and unique materials that can enrich their learning.
I work as a conservator, and that means that I am responsible for the physical well-being of the books. I look to the materiality of the book, so it is my job to kind of keep the Bolton Library with us for as long as possible. The Bolton Library is mainly print. You can actually follow the history of print through the bindings and through kind of the structures of the bindings. This is MS1, which is our oldest book and our oldest manuscript. It's an English medieval manuscript, and it's the only one that we have that is still within the original binding. So this is an English manuscript. This is a historiated initial. Historiated means that they have little figures in them. So historiated illumination here. And he's a little king, he's taking his little bath. It's probably a scene of baptism. And also you see these kind of beautiful, sort of almost fruit-like illuminations that you have throughout this manuscript. It's got 7, I think, pages of illumination. I see the efforts of preservation and conservation that has been done previously by people before us. So from that point of view, it really speaks of the fact that people at Cashel recognised this part as important, and they thought that it needed to be rebound, to be preserved.
Manuscripts, by their very definition, are unique items. No matter how hard you try to copy something you've written by hand, you will never successfully copy it exactly the second time. This is from the 17th century. This is a man. He is called J. Russell, and he's based in Holborn in modern-day London. And he is basically selling a cure-all, a quack medicine, called the elixir of scurvy grass. Around the edges here, you can see all of the conditions that this elixir is supposed to cure. This is the significance of the Bolton Library, that there's so much material in here that nobody has ever seen before. And they need to be seen because they're fantastic.
This collection is completely unique. It is collected in a moment in time that was very interested in science. It was very interested in geography. It had this kind of it was the new era of rationality, and the books really reflect that. It is really priceless, and it's also kind of the community of Cashel who's been keeping this. It's really important for them as well, because this has been very much a part of their history, and it's their library, and it should be kept for their future too.
The Bolton Library will forever be intrinsically linked with the history and heritage of Cashel. Having been housed in Cashel for over 200 years, it's important that an element of the library remains.
It was very unfortunate that it had to leave, but decisions were made based on the integrity and the protection of the library. We're very fortunate with the working relationship we have with the Glucksman Library in UL. They've been absolutely fantastic in terms of the resources that they've put into conserving the library, but also making it available to the broader public. The library is intrinsically linked to the history and the heritage of Cashel. It's part of our job to find a suitable location that there can be a presence of the Bolton Library here in Cashel for future generations to enjoy and explore.
This is a key thing in what was agreed, and over time this needs to come to fruition. The library would provide what we called a window on the collection on location in Cashel. So there would be some kind of a small display in Cashel of key contents of the library.
It's a treasure that I am so privileged to have been part of. A little bit sad that the books are no longer here in Cashel. The presence of Bolton will always be here.